Lee Gable. We're recording at Central Connecticut State University in New Britain, Connecticut. I'm interviewing Glenn Norton for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. In the room also is Patricia Kiley. Okay, so we're ready to start.
It's pronounced Nordine.
Nordine, I'm sorry.
Is that right?
Excuse me out there. Okay, so could you just for the record state your name and birth date and what branch of service and the highest rank you achieved?
Glenn Nordine, born 5/27/1947. I served in the United States Army, and I was medically retired as a Sergeant E5.
Okay. So, and where were you born?
New Haven, Connecticut.
And did you have siblings?
One brother.
One brother. And your parents, what their occupations?
My father was an advertising executive, and my mother most of the time was a homemaker.
Okay. And what were you doing before you were drafted?
Well, variously attending college and working, and when I was drafted, I was working at a gas station.
Mm-hmm. And were you married at that point?
No.
You were living at home?
I was living with my parents, yes.
Okay, so you get drafted, and now, let's see, where did you go when you first got drafted?
I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, for basic training and AIT.
And so you were in Fort Dix for how long?
Mid-March, I think it was mid-March to July. Mid-March to July, and then had 30 days leave before flying out to Fort Lewis, Washington, where they tried to decide where we were going to go.
So you had 30 days leave, and did you go back home?
Yes, I went back to Connecticut.
For 30 days, and then you went back to D.C.?
No, I went to Fort Lewis, state of Washington,
of Washington.
outside Seattle, somewhere. I'm not sure where.
So, and you were there for how
long? About a week. I don't remember the exact dates, but it was at a transitional period where Congress and the President were trying to figure out where they were sending people. So some people were getting diverted up to Alaska, some people were getting diverted over to Germany, and then the rest of us were not diverted at all and went over to Vietnam.
And so after a week, then you flew by, how did you get to Vietnam?
I don't remember the airline, but it was strange because it was a civilian airliner with civilian flight attendants, and we flew from Washington to Hawaii to Guam, and then from Guam to Cam Ranh Bay in Vietnam.
So were there any civilians on the plane, or just?
Well, the civilians were the pilots and the flight attendants.
So then, when you got to Vietnam, where did you land first?
First at Cam Ranh Bay, where we were. It's like, okay, now what are we doing? It was very sandy. Everything in the camp, or at least the section where I was all boardwalks, because the sand was so deep it was hard to walk in. And spent a few days there, and then we went to Da Nang, or I went to Da Nang, and that was where, in Da Nang, they had an area where you were divided up into the division you were going to go to. There was like the 101st, 82nd Airborne, 1st Cav, and I forget all of the ones that were there, but you started there in Da Nang, and then they sent you, while you were there, they were figuring out what platoon, company, battalion you were going to.
And so you were there for how long, do you think?
A few days.
Just a couple of days.
Enough to fill some sandbags for perimeter defense. They had to keep us busy.
So then you went from there to.
Then I went to Camp Eagle in the 101st Airborne in Phu Bai.
And you stayed there for,
Then that was it.
you were there?
I was there. That was the base camp.
Uh-huh.
And I was in Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion, 502nd Infantry Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division, Air Mobile. We weren't actually parachutists, most of us. So stayed there, I don't know, 2-3 days, getting oriented, getting my gear, getting everything that I was going to need. And then they put me on a resupply helicopter and choppered me out to a fire base where my platoon and company was. And that was, dropped me in, here's everybody. And that afternoon they put me out on an OP, an observation post, which was out away from the fire base. I don't remember how far away it was.
What is a fire base?
Well, actually it's an FSB, Fire Support Base, which is an artillery base, generally 105 and or 155 howitzers. And so as an infantryman, we supplied support for the fire base, for the artillerymen. The artillerymen were in charge of firing the artillery. We were in charge of defending the fire base.
And so then you went to this OP base?
OP, observation post, which is basically you stuck somebody out in the jungle to watch for any enemy activity.
Uh-huh.
And while I was out there, this was the first afternoon of really anything, and a couple of mortar rounds came into the fire base. Luckily, they were short rounds, which meant they landed short of the fire base. But that was my real introduction to Vietnam, and being an infantryman was sitting out on an OP while.
But you weren't at the fire base. You were.
I wasn't at the fire base, but I could see the fire base from where I was. I was up on a ridge near the fire base.
And this is how many days since you were in country, you think?
Maybe 10 at the most.
Wow.
At the very most, 10 days.
So
it's all very foggy as to how many days everything took.
So well, how did you feel when you saw that?
Oh shit! The basic realm. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you with somebody at this
No,
observation?
I
You're
was all by
yourself?
myself. Yeah.
And so nobody's there backing you up, or you're
Nope.
just sitting there by yourself?
Sitting there by yourself. Yeah.
So
yes, makes life interesting.
So now, are you writing to your parents at this point, or you're?
Oh yeah, I was writing wrote to them all the way through. I wrote from Cam Ranh Bay. I wrote from Da Nang. I wrote from when I was first at Camp Eagle, and then whenever I had a chance to write, I was writing.
Okay, so after you've been at the OP, are you stationed now at this fire base?
I think we were there. I don't really remember. I think we were there another couple of days, and then then we moved out from the fire base and just started traveling the trails, looking for the enemy, and then we started building landing zones, LZs, for helicopters.
And what did that entail?
Well, most of the time we had machetes and axes, and basically it was cutting down all the trees and the brush, and even digging to make a pad for the helicopters to land on, so that you would clear everything out, and then you would dig around the area and take it was very clayey soil, so you would dump it and then stomp on it to flatten it out and make the
So you didn't
pad.
have to use any chemicals or anything to do that?
No, we didn't use any chemicals for that. We used dynamite for some things.
What to blow?
That was one of my specialties.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What did you have to blow up?
Well, most of the time, trees that were this big, you could get down with regular axes and machetes. But when you got to the big ones, then you had to, basically you said, well, let's make it easy and blow them up. And I was, having been a pyromaniac as a kid,
It worked out nicely.
it worked out very well and they all thought I was crazy.
Just to make sure I guess we're good.
Okay.
So you're doing the landing zones.
Right.
And now where are you staying and sleeping, and do you have a
Just off the landing zone, we would have a perimeter on the trail. Generally, the landing zones would be on a trail, an already established trail that was there, which the trails were maybe a foot, 2 feet wide, and then you would, on one side or the other, generally on one side or the other, you would set up a perimeter, a circle with the machine guns we carried 2 machine guns in the platoon, and the machine guns went on the trails, one in one direction, one in the other. And that's where we
And you just
slept.
sleep straight out on the trail.
Yeah, well, you would have your firing position would be on the trail. Your sleeping position would be off to the side of the trail, where you'd have to cut down some brush and stuff for your squad to sleep. And you would just do it all the way around in a circle, from one side all the way around on the trails.
And you had no cover, over you or...
No, we had ponchos and poncho liners, which was a kind of a blanket, but it was very lightweight. And
so I can imagine that it must have been buggy.
yeah, well,
What was the weather?
Well, when I was first there in August and September, and I guess into October, it was really damn hot. in the 90s and 100s, and very humid, and lots of mosquitoes, and we had little bottles of 100% DEET mosquito repellent that you kind of slathered on. We also took 2 malaria pills. There was the Daily, that was, you took every day, and then there was the horse pill that you took every week for 2 different strains of malaria.
So there was more than one strain of...
Right.
So now you're doing did you do the LZs constantly, or
Pretty much. I mean, we were doing LZs pretty straightforwardly. I mean, we would build an LZ, we would set up an ambush site or a perimeter around either around the LZ or off to one side of the LZ, and that was our life. We would, sometimes we would go into an LZ, and then just go out on one of the trails. They'd give us a direction, we'd go out on that trail and just keep going until we either found something or didn't find something, or they told us to turn around or whatever. In mid-September, we had done that. We had what was called a one-way LZ, where the helicopter had to come in one way and then had to back out because of the way the terrain was. You couldn't chop all the trees down enough for the helicopter to go out, come in and go out. They had to come in and back out. We were at that we were just there. They brought us in, and then we went out down the other one side of the LZ and out. I forget how many days, probably a couple of days. And then we were told to turn around and go back to where we'd come from. And when we got back to that LZ, we found a fresh booby trap where we had left the LZ.
And what is it? What is a booby trap?
Well, in this case, they were little fish cans that the Vietnamese used as their sea rations. And it was about, oh, I don't know, yay tall and about inch and a half in diameter. And they would put nails and stuff in it, fill it with black powder, and then you'd have a tripwire that ran across the trail. And no, that was the basics that
So
ones
you
that we
had
saw.
gone out and then came back.
And then we came back to the same LZ, and now there were booby traps there, and they were fresh. So my squad leader, Frenchie, climbed up onto the LZ, and when he was up there, he spotted the VC that was planting these booby traps.
And what's a VC?
Viet Cong,
Oh,
the guerrilla, the guerrilla section of the war in Vietnam. Had your VC and your NVA, your North Vietnamese Army.
and how could you tell the difference?
Well, the VC were normally in the black pajamas that almost everybody wore. I don't know what material they were, but and then the NVA had real uniforms, complete with helmets, and mostly their helmets were pith helmets,
Mm-hmm.
but a kind of khaki uniform with belts, and they had all of the backpacks and things. Where the VC were normally in their regular civilian garb.
So your
Platoon
leaders?
No, my squad leader, Frenchie, Glenn Beaulieu, went running up onto the LZ, saw the VC, fired at him, ran after him, and then tripped one of the other booby traps that was on the LZ, and was wounded. He got shrapnel in his forearm, and that was the last I saw. No, last I saw Frenchie until after the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was dedicated, and then we ran into each other again down there in Washington, D.C.
That's awesome. That must have been a great reunion.
That was really, yeah, that was.
So, is this the first time you're actually seeing the enemy when you're
Never
trying to-
saw the enemy.
You didn't see
I
it.
never saw the enemy because I was far enough back in the squad, and there was only one, and the other guys who were older and wiser, they went up on the LZ. They found him hiding under a log, and they just killed him.
Mhm.
But I never saw his body. We never saw his body. And I was sent across the other side of the LZ with other members of my squad to secure that side of the other side of the LZ, while we brought in a medevac chopper to take Frenchie out to go take him to the hospital.
So if you build the LZ and then you're just kind of there waiting for something to happen, what do you do in this time period of, you've already built it?
Well, if we've built it and they're letting us hang around, we read, wrote letters. Some of the guys played poker. I was never a good gambler, so I didn't play poker. I would go over and watch. But you guys, you lose your money. I'm not.
What about music? Was there
No.
no radio or?
No. I'm not sure if anybody had one. I don't. I'm trying to remember. I don't think so. I don't.
Probably wouldn't be a great idea to have.
Yeah, no. Yeah. We made enough noise as it was without having a radio.
So you're going around and making the LCs, and when's the first time you actually see some action?
I think it was October. We moved in a company-sized sweep. We all staged. I don't remember where we were from, where we staged. We all got on helicopters, and it was just this huge air mobile operation for the whole company. So you're talking. Normally, you put 5 guys per helicopter and at least 120 people in the company. So you can imagine the number of helicopters that were needed. And we all flew into a low-lying area. I think it was near Phu Loc, And we all flew in, dropped us off, and then we started marching. And we were marching along in the night. And as it turned out, my squad was the last squad in the last platoon in the line of march. And so we were probably stretched out, I don't know, a couple of 100 yards, if not more. And the next thing we know, up at the very head of the column was a firefight. And it was very quick, very fast, and we were just said, okay, sit down, turn around, and face the other direction from where we came, and we set up our kind of across the trail line, in case there was something coming up from behind us. And then it was just kind of pull guard duty and sleep and wait until morning to find out, we had communication saying that I think they killed 4 or 5 NVA, and that was all we knew. None of our people were hurt, and it was, the NVA just kind of walked right into the head of the column, and they were killed. And then the next morning, I went over to where the NVA were, where they had been shot and killed, and just to see what a really dead body looked like.
And what was your feeling when you?
I was very happy that I didn't throw up. That was my. I think that was more of my concern than anything else, that I was going to see these bodies and have a real bad reaction to it. And it was, that was the first time I actually seen somebody. Who'd been shot and killed.
So this is in October.
This is October.
This is the first time you're
seeing. Right.
So now, if we move ahead to say, like the holiday season, November, Thanksgiving, where are you at this point?
Okay. Well, we were from that point on, from October, as far as I remember. Well, sometime in October, we were at Los Banos Fire Base on Route 1 in Fulak. And we actually had movies at night when we were there. I don't remember the movies we watched, except that we watched Romeo and Juliet, the more modern version. And it was like, oh, that's what Romeo and Juliet's all about. Because it was actually being played by teenagers, which is what that was to me. Like, because all the other times I'd seen it be these 30-year-old people trying to play 15-year-olds, and it never made sense to me until then.
So you just remember that you saw Romeo
and Juliet, right. And then from there, we went up into the hills from there, and we just marched along, and now the monsoon season was starting, the rainy season. And so it was cloudy and gray all the time. And so we came into Firebase Rifle, and that's where we were for Thanksgiving. And we actually had the thing that was nice about a fire base, most of the fire bases, you actually had cooks. You didn't have to eat your sea rations. You actually got to have real food, right? And they actually put on a whole turkey and stuffing and mashed potatoes and vegetable spread for us.
So at the fire base, they had like shelter there?
Yeah. Well, in the fire bases, you generally built bunkers. You dug holes in the ground and put logs over the top, or dug a ditch, and sandbagged them, and all that kind of stuff. And they dug a hole for the kitchen, and had it all sandbagged up.
And cooked on fire and stuff?
They had gas-fired
like grill kind of things?
grills. I don't even remember what they had, but I mean, they had. I just had the food, and that's all I cared about was something besides sea rations and lurps.
Right. So you're in the monsoon season at this point,
right?
Around Thanksgiving, and what is that? Is it rain constantly?
Well, sometimes it would be, rain for 4, 5, 6, 7 days, and then it might get cloudy, and you might get to see the sun for an hour or two, and then it would cloud back up, and then rain for 5 or 6 more days, and you're generally soaking wet. We weren't supposed to have hooches, which what we did was we took our ponchos and strung them together and made a cover out of them, and they were called hooches.
And what does that mean?
It's basically a house, or you would call the houses in the villages hooches.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, the villages houses were one room where everything was done. You slept, you ate, you did everything in the. So we made hooches out of our ponchos,
So
which generally
dry.
just something like making like a tarp over your head
Mm-hmm.
to keep you dry at night. We weren't supposed to. They told us don't, but we did anyway because it's raining like mad out here. And the idea was that they could see our hooches, but it's like it's pitch black.
So you're sleeping right on the jungle floor.
On the ground, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what about snakes and bugs?
Well, generally we didn't run into snakes, but the leeches were fun. Down at when we were down in the villages where the rice paddies were, we had these bright green with two red striped leeches on their backs. And we saw one time when we were down there that was about 8-10 inches long. And we were marching through the rice paddy, and if you had an aerial view of our line of march, you would see the line go, it's going along. Then it would just kind of bow out. Avoid the leech at all costs. We had one guy when we were down there. This was, I guess, later. It was later. All of the memories get kind of confused as chronological. But we were down there, and one of the guys woke up with one of them on his penis in the morning because we had button flies on our uniforms. And he went to rip it off, and luckily one of his friends grabbed him and held him down while another guy went and got his bug repellent, the DEET. And we found out that you could kill leeches by dripping the DEET on them. And what that did was it would make them withdraw from your skin, and then they would inject the coagulant. When the leech bites you, it injects an anticoagulant so it can suck the blood, and then when it drops off, it injects a coagulant so that it closes up the wound. If you rip it off, you're going to just keep on bleeding. That's why they grabbed him before he could rip it off, and they just got the DEET and killed it. One morning when we were up in the hills, I woke up with a land leech, with a brown one, inside my mouth. And I woke up and was, oh, something's in here. Luckily, his head, the biting part of him, was on the back of my tooth, and I was just able to pull him out.
So how much sleep did you get?
Well, you pulled guard duty depending on the size of your squad. Generally, you pulled at least 2 hours a night, and you would rotate who had the first duty, who had second, third, fourth, whatever.
How did you mentally calm yourself enough to sleep?
You didn't have to mentally calm yourself. You were so damn tired.
You're exhausted.
But you always slept with one ear open. And that was one of the interesting things. I don't remember ever hearing anyone snore when we were out in the boonies, because you really slept kind of very lightly.
Okay.
Because one morning on one ambush, I had the very last guard before sunup, and I had been sitting Indian style, and I just laid right back on my back, and I guess I fell asleep, but I was so lightly asleep that when my platoon sergeant, who was looking to catch people asleep, came over, I heard him, and I sat straight up, looked at him, and said, "Good morning, platoon sergeant." And he couldn't tell if I'd been asleep, but I knew exactly where he was, and so it was kind of like, got away with that one.
So yeah, I can imagine sleep was pretty rough.
You were generally so damn tired after, you're carrying. Well, when I became the machine gunner in October, the machine gun was about 23 pounds itself, then another 8 pounds of ammunition, plus a 50 to 60 pound pack.
So there's one machine gunner per
2 machine gunners per platoon,
platoon. So you were one of the 2.
and I was one of the 2.
And how many men are in the platoon?
Generally around 30.
30. So there's 2 machine guns for 30 people.
Right.
So now you've had Thanksgiving dinner, and now you're starting to move into December, and it's still more of the same.
More of the same, just humping around.
And humping means?
Just means you're out on the trails, going from one place to the other, setting up ambushes at night, and then depending on what they wanted you to do, maybe building an LZ, but I don't think, during the monsoons we didn't build a lot of LZs.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard enough to get the choppers out. During the monsoon season, we were normally we were resupplied every 4 days with 4 days of rations.
Mm-hmm.
But during monsoon season, we were resupplied with 5 days of rations, because it was never sure whether the helicopters would be able to come out and resupply you or not. And one time we actually had to wait at least an extra day before we were resupplied. So we were all out of food and had to wait a day.
So you have these paths, and you're making like a secure spot for you to kind of stay,
right,
and just wait.
Right.
And then you clean that up and move on and do it again somewhere further down on these. These paths are just village paths, or paths that
paths through the mountains, through the hills, what they call mountains. We wouldn't laugh at here, but yeah, that's basically it. You know, you would go from one place to another, and basically what you're doing was, I guess they call them seek and destroy. Most of the time we did an awful lot of seeking and very little destroying.
Excuse me, I'm just going to turn the tape over. Okay. I'm going to try to, at least. Sorry about this. So
Okay, we did seek and destroy. Yeah, and we did more seeking than we did destroying, especially in the winter during the monsoon season. Most of the time, there wasn't much going on, and in December, I was one of the lucky ones. I got to go and see the Bob Hope show. But
for Christmas?
For Christmas.
Was it Christmas Day?
I have no clue whether it was Christmas Day or what day it was anymore. I just know it was the Bob Hope show. It was in December sometime. I don't know I forget how many weeks he spent, going around the country. He generally did a show a day.
So what was that like?
Well, it was interesting, but you were so far back from the stage. It was like, the people that had the best were the helicopter people and the people who were your rear echelons, who had binoculars and things like that, and they could actually see what was going on. I mean,
so you couldn't even really see anything?
You couldn't really see anything. I mean, you get to hear the jokes and you could laugh, but
so they took you from the jungle. And
they brought. Yeah, we were supposed to go in from my company. I think there were supposed to be 31 of us that came in, and we were supposed to get a shower and a hot meal and then have some downtime after the show. And as it turned out, they brought us in an hour before the show, plunked us in our seats at the show. We watched Bob Hope and went back to the battalion area and right back out into the field.
So
And we were all a little pissed off at that one.
I would imagine. So did you get anything from home, gifts from home, or?
What did I get? Well, I got at some point, I don't remember whether it was for Christmas or not, but a buck knife, a sheath knife, because we used them for everything.
Mm-hmm.
That and shoelaces. We always wanted shoelaces because you used shoelaces instead of like rope or string or whatever when you made your hooch, you needed something to tie it to a tree.
So your family would send you.
Sometimes, but most of the time what I liked the best was when they would send me, what's the farms?
Hillshire Farms?
Like Hillshire, but not Hillshire Farms, but, I can't remember, but I would get a gift pack with salami and things like that, and my favorite was the smoked oysters, because it's in a tin like like sardines, and smoked oysters, and I would share everything with the guys in my squad, but Han, our Kit Carson scout, the North Vietnamese, who was formerly North Vietnamese Army, he and I were the only ones who liked the smoked oysters, so I'd share them with him. And he was.
Do you still like the oysters?
Oh yeah, I haven't had any in quite a while, but I still like them. Yeah.
So so now moving into the first of the year, do you?
It's still raining and wet, and we're still not much is going on. I don't know if it was, well, we did do a couple of some more time. I'm not even sure of the timing. We did stand downs at Eagle Beach.
And what does a stand down mean?
You get to go back in the rear someplace and take a break.
Ah.
And at Eagle Beach, it was a real break. It was a real vacation because you didn't have to train. You didn't have to do anything. And you had USO shows. You had a bar. You were on the beach. That's why it was Eagle Beach. You just got to go and, it was in-country R&R center.
And how long would you get?
Generally a few days. I think we did it twice. At least when I read my letters home, I found out, I'd done it twice. I only remember one.
So for
and then other times you would do a stand down at your battalion area, which meant tents to sleep in, hot showers. I mean, that was the first thing we did when when the choppers brought us in, was go for the showers and fresh clean clothes.
What was it like being wet all the time?
Well, I had a really bad case of immersion foot, also known as trench foot to older generations, which meant kind of like the worst case of athlete's foot you've ever had. And for me, it just meant that the skin between my toes was sloughing off, and it itched like mad, and we used this powder. I pour powder into my socks and powder into my boots and try to keep them dry, and try to always have an extra pair of socks to put on, but it didn't help much. My feet were kind of a mess.
So you were just constantly wet?
Constantly wet, yeah. Even though I used to carry, for when you had your C rations and you wanted to heat your C rations, you got these things called heat tabs that are kind of like solid sterno. And what I used to do was I carried extras, and during the rainy season I would take my little stove, put a heat tab in, light it, and then I'd wrap my poncho or poncho liner around me, and I would at least get my clothes dry.
And that would dry them?
That would dry them, yeah. That would get warm enough under that poncho liner to dry it out. And you had to hold it tight because that stuff was toxic.
How warm was it? I mean, the weather itself.
In the monsoons, I'm guessing it was in the 70s and 80s. It would be, you'd get cool enough at night that you would want to have your poncho liner and poncho on you. I can remember, sleeping down near Fulak with the poncho over me and just the rain pounding down on the poncho.
So, when you only went back to Eagle Camp to see Bob Hope, basically? Is that?
Well, we went back, I think sometime in October, November, we went in for a stand down for a few days. I know I went back because I was having trouble with my knees to see a doctor. And they said, well, they can't find anything, but, let us know if you have more problems. But I remember for sure in March, we had a battalion-sized stand down, which meant, tents and hundreds of guys all roaming around, USO shows and training. We learned how to rappel, and then we learned how to slack jump off a tower for the possibility that they would try to insert us into some place instead of having a landing zone. They could just make us jump out of a helicopter to go into
Can you
someplace.
explain what slack jump means?
Okay, a slack jump means that you're standing on the skid of the helicopter, and you have between 8 and 10 feet of slack rope between you and the bolt that your rope is tied off to in the helicopter, so that when you jump off the side of the helicopter, you're just kind of jumping out into midair. It's rappelling, but there's nothing under you. You're not like rappelling, you're normally jumping and hitting a wall of some kind and bouncing as you bounce your way down a wall. But with the slack jump, you just jump straight out of the helicopter and slide down to the ground as fast as you can.
So that's what you would do when you would go back to Camp Eagle, was have
Yeah, you
this
would
jump.
train. We had firing exercises. We would assault. They had built the equivalent of a Vietnamese village, and we would do assaults on the village. Kind of refresher course to what we were doing. Of course, most of the time we were there, if we were near a village like Phu Loc, we never assaulted it because there was, they were supposedly friendly, but we had no clue. And we weren't interested in the village ourselves. We really wanted to get back out in the boonies, where we were in a free fire zone, as it was called, which meant if you see somebody, you get to shoot at them. And that was a lot easier than being in the villages or down.
I can imagine that the BCs being in this garb of the villagers, that it would have been hard to distinguish between them.
Yeah, you had no clue.
So when does the monsoon season end?
It started drying up around March, where you would have days with sun instead of every day with rain. And I think it was in there. Well, during part of the monsoon season, we were up on the mountain, and that was where my trench foot was really bad. And we had moved out, and my platoon moved out in one direction, and another platoon came up. And in the process of all that moving around, an NVA paymaster showed up.
What is that?
He had to pay for the NVA Army. He and a few people, and the other platoon who had moved into where we were able to ambush him and kill him. And they figured out he was a paymaster because he had lots and lots and lots of money on him. So there were like 4 or 5. I think they killed 4 or 5 NVA that day.
A paymaster, meaning that he had to pay for?
He had pay for the North Vietnamese Army. Yeah.
Oh, he had their pay.
He had their pay.
Oh, okay.
Now we had paymasters in our army
So
to pay us.
So you had captured him?
No, they didn't capture him. They killed him.
Oh.
I mean, it was just, there are the NVA and shoot. I mean, that was, you didn't bother asking questions. And then it was later in March where almost everything that had happened as far as firefights and things were happening around me, but not to me. Mm-hmm. And then I think it was March, we had come down a trail to a river, and there was a little bunker across the river, and it turned out to be empty. And we came across the river, went past the bunker, set up a perimeter, and then about 10 of us, or one or two squads, went back to the bunker along the river with Han, our Kit Carson scout. And Han was next to me on my right, and we're facing the river, and all of a sudden Han goes, "VC come." And we're like, "What the hell are you talking about?" "VC come." And finally we said, "Where?" And he pointed upriver, and everybody quieted down, and we're sitting there, and 2 NVA in their black pajamas with their AK-47s slung up over their shoulders come trotting down the street, and we were just so surprised. We were like, "Huh?" And then Han, I assume, hollered in Vietnamese, "Open fire," and he opened fire, and the rest of us opened fire, and that was it. They were killed, just about as fast as you could. I mean, it was all like you know, from the time he said VC come to the time we killed him, it was 3 minutes, 4 minutes, something like that. Maybe even less. That was the first up close and personal, as I called it, where you actually saw the enemy and you shot at him.
And so no one knows who actually killed him.
No, I mean, it was just there were maybe 10 of us sitting there, and 10 of us opened fire, and we're all aiming in the general vicinity. And I mean,
So what did you do with them after?
well, then they called police the bodies. They got any information, intelligence, money, souvenirs off of them, and they took the bodies and put them in the bunker. Me with the machine gun, I was assigned to guard duty, and so and then they had the engineers came out and blew the bunker up. So we pulled guard duty for them while they did that, and then we just went on our merry way to the next thing we were doing.
And what was the next thing you were doing?
Just more humping the boonies. And that was in March, and then it's getting clearer, and then in April the weather was getting better, and we started running into more of the either VC or NVA who were hanging around. Instead of, most of the time, we had one incident where the point man was going up the trail, and all of a sudden a hand grenade went off, and he was wounded, and we came up and started firing up the trail because we really couldn't see what we were doing, and then we stopped. We didn't get any fire back, so we went up, and the trail went up, and then it forked into two trails, and right at the point of the trails was a bunker, and we found medical equipment in there and blood-stained bandages and things, so we assumed that whoever was there had been wounded at some point and had just heard us coming, threw a hand grenade and got the hell out of there, or DD'd, as we would say. DD. DD means run, and DD Mao means run faster or run really fast.
So that's Vietnamese.
Yeah, I think there was a kind of crazy combination of Vietnamese and French in a lot of things, because when something was a lot, it was beaucoup, which is in French really beaucoup, but in Vietnam and for us it was beaucoup. I mean, there are all sorts of phrases, and I don't remember a whole heck of a lot of them anymore.
So now the weather's changing. It's April, and what do you mean by changing? Now is it getting
Now
really
it's
hot
sunny.
again?
Now it's getting sunny. It's getting hot, and we're doing our thing. And we were on a fire base, and this was okay. I'm jumping all the way to the end of April 26th, and we were on a fire base, and they were sending us to an LZ, and I was in the lead chopper. We came in. We were just coming in and about to land when a mortar round landed to our rear and left and behind us, and whatever it did, it cut power to the helicopter, and we were about 5 to 10 feet off the pad, and it just slammed into the ground. And so we all scrambled out, and I still remember watching, because I was in the left-hand door to have the gun sticking out, and I can remember watching the pilots just flipping switches on the top of the helicopter, shutting everything down, so I guess so nothing would catch on fire or
Then the helicopter was done after that?
That helicopter was toast, yeah.
Let me just check this again. Okay, we're still doing good. Hopefully we have audio.
And so, we scrambled out of the helicopter, out the right side door, and then the door gunners and the pilots scrambled out too. And my squad, the 5 of us, set up on one side of the LZ, on the right-hand side, and kind of like, okay, what's going on? And luckily it wasn't a real hot LZ, it was just a mortar round coming in. And then there's all this communication back and forth, how are we going to get picked up, how are we getting off of here, because there's only 9 of us up there. And it was only a one-pad LZ, so they couldn't send in other choppers with more troops. So it was wide enough, and another helicopter came in to get the helicopter crew off, and he had to put his skid on a log, on a stump, so that the guys could climb. They could climb up, and when he did that, another mortar round came in, aimed at him, and luckily it didn't hit him or hurt him, and he was able to just put his nose down and dive down the side of the hill, and that left the five of us sitting there by ourselves, and we could see the fire base we had come from, and we could see our whole company lining the fire base, watching what was going on with us. And when the helicopter went down, they had taken a couple of Cobra gunships, had been on the other side of the hill, and they quick came up over the hill, and they had spotters on the LZ spotting where the mortar rounds had come from, and then the Cobras shot up that area with rockets and mini guns.
So how did you get out of there?
Well, then they brought another helicopter in and took us out, but we had to leave all our gear there, except our weapons and ammunition. We brought all of that out with us, but our packs with all our food and all our personal stuff we had to leave on the LZ. And then they took us then we went right from there to a firefight that another platoon had gotten into, where they'd run into an NVA bunker complex. And we came in, and I didn't realize that when we got there, I said, wait a minute, there's the five of us, we don't have any food for tonight, what are we going to do for food? And somebody said, well, take one of those packs over there. And it wasn't until later that I realized that those were packs of somebody who had been wounded or killed. And we started towards the bunker complex, and that was the first time I saw one of our body bags, somebody carrying a body back.
So what's is it?
A body bag is just a big bag with a zipper down the middle that when somebody died, you put them in a body bag and zip the bag up and then carried the bag.
And what these bunkers that you were in, or you went down to the bunkers? You said it was at
North Vietnamese.
North Vietnamese. So you came up like front line in front of their bunkers.
Yeah, they would have a trail that would lead into their bunker complex, and they would have a bunker right on the trail, and it was basically it was all mud and logs and things, and it was basically routing them out of there. During that week, we passed through. They had killed everybody, done everything they needed to do, and then my platoon stayed on the bunker complex that night to see if anybody came to the bunker complex. Nobody did, and so we moved out and went someplace else. And I think it was that same week where we came upon another bunker complex, and we got all jumbled up, and I ended up still with my full pack on, my pack and my machine gun on, wearing it, and VC or NVA threw a hand grenade out of a bunker. Somebody saw it. I heard he yelled grenade. I saw it, and I tried to do a backflip down the hill. And I ended up just kind of getting hung up on my pack with my butt aimed right at the hand grenade, which turned out to be a dud. And so one of the other guys from one of the other platoons came over, and he finally picked it up and threw it on down the hill. And part of whether that was first or second going on, that somebody walked right over the top of a bunker, didn't even drop a grenade in it, and NVA popped up behind the guy, and luckily for him, our battalion commander was back there with his .45 and just was able to shoot the guy before he caused us any more trouble. And that was going along. And that was this whole week from April 26th, and then Sunday, May 3rd, we have been out humping, and we stopped and set up a perimeter, and one of the squads went out, and they got fired upon, And so then the rest of us left our gear except for our weapons, and we went up to where they were, and then we had an online. We were going to do an online assault of the bunker complex, which meant we were all in a straight line, and we were just going to sweep up on the bunker complex. And there was a guy next to me, one guy next to me, my assistant gunner Marshall, and all of a sudden an M16 fired, and the guy next to me, who was brand new, started going back down the hill, and I turned to him and said, "Where the hell do you think you're going?" And he turned back to me and said, "I've been shot." And I looked, and I could see the bullet hole, blood welling up in his uniform. And so he went back down the hill, but because it was an M16, we stopped our assault, and the lieutenant got on the radio and tried to find out if we had really been fired up friendly fire, because we'd had an incident a few weeks before where somebody had gotten shot in a friendly fire incident.
And they didn't use M16s? Or?
No, they had AK-47s, and they had 51 caliber machine guns, and they had a 30 caliber 308 machine gun, but
I'm going to change too. Sorry. The mic is on.
okay, that isn't.
That mic is on, right?
Yes, I haven't touched that other than to move it closer. Okay, so where was it? We were online, and like I said, the guy next to me, I have no clue what his name was. He was only with us for like 3 days. And we had the M16 fire, so we thought maybe it was friendly fire, so we stopped doing our assault. And the lieutenant called in to find out, and we found out that no, it wasn't the other platoons, one of the other platoons was coming from the other direction towards the bunker complex. And they said, no, we hadn't fired, so that's when we realized the NVA had a captured M16, which, they would use, and it would confuse us and slow things down a little bit. And then when we did that, when we finally figured that out, then we started to move forward, and then we did a recon by fire, as they call it, which you just start shooting in the general vicinity of where you're going. This was really, for me, the very first big fight I was in. And this was 8 months into my tour of duty, and it was like, this is the first big one. And so I started firing my machine gun, and I was in a bit of a daze, and realized I was on my knees with my machine gun and firing, and realized I was shooting low, and then as I started to lift up to fire higher, I realized I was seeing all these black and blue and yellow flashes in front of me. And I came to a realization, they're throwing stuff at me. I'm the machine gun. They're throwing stuff at me. I had run through 100 rounds of ammunition, and my AG, Marshall, had come over from my left, put a new belt of ammunition on, and he went back to his position. He didn't want to be anywhere near the machine gun. And I started firing again, and realizing all these flashes were coming at me, and I looked up, and I saw a Chinese communist hand grenade coming at me. That's about a cylinder about 4 inches long and about 1.5 inches in diameter. And as I say it, I zigged when I should have zagged. I saw it coming, I tried to get out of the way, and ended up right in the way. And the hand grenade blew up about 6 to 12 inches from my left knee. And the first thing I remember, after the hand grenade went off was, okay, am I dead or alive? And then I said, well, I must be alive because it hurts like hell. And Marshall came over and picked me up, threw me over his shoulder in a fireman's carry, and took me back down the hill a ways. And then Mel, my squad leader, don't remember his last name, and one of the other guys had made a poncho stretcher and put me on the poncho stretcher and took me farther away from the firefight. And then I was lying there. My left leg was bent up like that, and Rudy, our medic, came over, and he needed 3 of our bandages, which are like I don't know, about 5 by 7 to cover up my knee. And I got to look at my knee, and it was like, oh, looked like hamburger, just kind of this crater in a mountain. And he just put 1 in the middle and 2 on either side of it. And he gave me a morphine shot in my right leg. And I was lying there, and my eyes were all dirty, and with, I was trying to clean out my eyes because all dirt had gotten blown into my eyes. And I don't know if he ended up bandaging any other parts of me. I just remember the bandage on my leg and the morphine shot, and then I wanted a cigarette, so I reached to get a cigarette out of my shirt pocket and realized I didn't have a shirt. My shirt had been blown away on the whole left side. And the platoon, actually the company sergeant came over, and I asked, anything I can do for you, son? I said, sure, I want a cigarette, but I want a hardcore. Well, he got me a Pall Mall, and I wish I'd said, I'll take anything, because the Pall Mall, I smoked Camel unfiltered at that time. But I had a cigarette, and I don't know how long I was lying there. I used to say 45 minutes, but the more I think about it over the years, Rudy came over and gave me another morphine shot. So if he gave me another morphine shot, it must have been longer than 45 minutes. And then they brought a jungle pennant. They brought in a medevac helicopter to get me and the guy who'd been next to me out, and they were fired on from the bunker complex. So the medevac helicopter took off, and they brought in the Cobra gunships, and then they fired up that bunker complex something fierce. And then when the medevac helicopter came in again, they weren't fired on, and they took us out. But we had, in our training in March that I talked about, we had training on jungle penetrators, which looks kind of like a bell weight. It's kind of round and big on the bottom and comes up narrow at the top, and it has 3 flaps on it that come down, and you're supposed to sit on the flaps to get pulled up out of the jungle. But on the top of the penetrator was a ring that was there to keep the cable from unraveling. And they had taught us in the training in March, don't touch the ring. Don't touch the ring. It's made a nice handle. I mean, it was a great thing to grab onto. Because if you did, the cable would unravel and you would fall back into the jungle. And I can remember reaching up for the ring, and I could look up at the helicopter and see people yelling at me. Couldn't hear them, but they were yelling at me. I reached for the ring, and then my training went, don't touch the ring. And I brought my hand back down. And they had me sitting on 2 flaps. And they had the guy next to me, who had been wounded next to me, sitting on the flap opposite me. And we both were hugging the penetrator. And because I had asked for, knowing that my leg was wounded, I'd asked for a basket, but they didn't have a basket. They said, can you do a jungle penetrator? And I said, well, yeah, okay. Just as we were getting up out of the trees, one of the saplings that had been cut off by the rockets from the gunship, my left leg swung into that, and I screamed. And I screamed so loud that the guys on the ground could hear me, because I ran in, when I was in Japan, I ran into Jim Pando, who said, yeah, why did you scream? He was on the ground, and they had heard me. It was like, whoa, I guess that hurt. And they got me into the helicopter, and they were trying to get me to. Okay. They got me into the helicopter, and they were trying to, can you use that leg? And, to them, it looked like it had just been shot, but I mean, my leg was no good. Took me on the helicopter, got me to the hospital. got me in the hospital on a gurney, and a medic came over and was trying to take my boots off. Well, he just undid the laces and tried to pull it off. Well, again, that grated all the bones and everything together, and I screamed, and I must have, you know. And then a doctor came over and screamed at the medic, "You never pull a boot off. You cut that thing off, and you don't worry about it." And, you know, they were unwrapping my leg, and they were, you know, one of the nurses came over and put her hands over my face to, you know, block my view of my leg, but I took a look anyway. I was sneaky that way. And then the next thing I knew, you know, they asked me something, you know, where were you wounded, what part of the country were you wounded? And somewhere northwest of Hue. That was all I had no clue. That was, you know, the general vicinity I thought we were in. And they put me to sleep. They operated on me, and I woke up in the recovery room, and I had bandages on my eyes, and so I lifted up one. Oh, I can still see. And lifted up the other one. I can still see. And the nurse saw me doing it, and "Don't touch those bandages." I said to her, "Just wanted to see if I knew I could see when I came in here. I wanted to make sure I could still see." And that was that. And I spent a week in Vietnam in the hospital. And while I was in the hospital, we got mortared. That was fun because they couldn't get me out of bed because I was in a 1.5 spica cast. They call it. Went up to my chest, came halfway down my right leg, just above my knee, all the way down my left leg, with holes strategically placed, and a bar that went between the two to keep it from breaking. So they couldn't take me out of bed. So she came over and threw a flak jacket across my chest and put a helmet on my head. And I was like, you just had to lie there and go, "Oh, no, what if they get into the hospital? You know, I'm just laying here. They can just, you know." And luckily, nothing else happened other than we got mortared.
So how long did you stay in the country for?
I was there about a week, and then they flew me out of there, and I spent the night in the Philippines, in the hospital in the Philippines, and then they flew me to Japan, and I spent a week in Japan. They operated on me again, and like I said, Jim Bear Pando came to visit me. He'd been wounded at the same operation, and how were you? What you doing? And they asked me. The funniest thing to me was when they asked me where I wanted to be sent to in the United States. Well, where are you from? I'm from Connecticut. Okay, well, you've got two choices. You can go to Fort Devens in Massachusetts, the hospital there, or you can go to St. Albans Naval Hospital on Long Island. Okay, well, which one's going to be easier for my parents to get? I'm like, I don't know. They've got enough painkiller in me to make decisions, but I finally said St. Albans. And they said, okay, and I flew from Japan to Alaska in what was it, a C-130, one of the big cargo planes that was set up as a hospital ship. And flew to Alaska and just knew that it was Alaska because they opened the back door and it was really cold. Where the hell are we? Oh, we're in Alaska. Oh, okay. And then from Alaska went to Washington, D.C., spent the night at Walter Reed Army Hospital, out in the back wards. My cousin and her husband, who live in the D.C. area, came to see me, and they came in the front door of Walter Reed, and they're wandering around trying to find me, and they're walking into hospital rooms that had chandeliers and also, but that was for the they walked into the brass area. When it came to us, it was the back wards, the big old wooden wards from probably still around from World War II. And, they found me, visited with them. I'm trying to figure out how they ever managed to not go, because I had powder burns all over the left side of my face and in this cast, and laid out, not looking so hot.
So then you went from there
to St. Albans Naval Hospital.
And when's the first time your parents saw you?
I think they saw me, I think, on the 18th of May. I was wounded May 3rd, and then I think I arrived on the 16th in St. Albans, and then they were getting me set up, getting me cleaned up. I had gangrene. They washed my wound. That was a lot of fun. That hurt. And they gave me morphine to handle being cleaned up. And then they decided that they were going to operate on me again on the 18th. And I ended up being the last person being operated on that day because I was the dirtiest as far as infection was concerned. So they started with the cleanest person infection-wise and worked their way down the list for the OR until they got to the person with the worst infection.
And why did they do that?
To prevent my infections from infecting somebody else. So it was kind of like, we'll take the worst at the end. And then I woke up in the recovery room, and that's when my parents saw me. But I had a private recovery room, which was really interesting.
So they visited with you. How long were you in St. Albans?
From May 16th to December 7th? 17th? Something like that. The middle of the 17th. Yeah, that's right, the 17th.
And you were in this cast, though?
No.
The
cast came off. Well, the cast came off when they took me to the operating room at St. Albans, and then when I was back in bed, I was in bed, no cast, with my left leg. I had traction at a bar through the tibia, and had my leg up in the air, being stretched, so I wouldn't lose too much length on my leg, because I had what was called, what they medically called a traumatic patelectomy, which meant my kneecap had been blown off. And the end of the femur had been shattered, and they tried to pin some of the bone back, but it was too late. That part of the bone was still dead, had died, so they had to, the next time they went in, they had to cut it off. Altogether, I had 8 operations, 2 in Vietnam, 1 in Vietnam, 1 in Japan, and then 6 more at St. Albans.
How did they save your leg? What did they end
Well,
up doing?
when I got there, my doctor was Dr. Ingham, and he had been he's an orthopedist, and we were talking, and he said to me, well, you know, in civilian practice, if I'd seen a wound like this, I would have just cut your leg off. But, he said, I've been here long enough and seen you young guys really heal very well. So we're going to do our best to help you keep your leg. And I said, good, that's fine with me. I was perfectly happy with that scenario. And so that's what we did. So I kept my leg. I can't bend it or, you know.
And there's no knee.
Well, there's a knee. There's no kneecap. The end of the femur, there's a chunk on the femur that's gone here. And I think there's also a hole that runs from side to side. And I guess the tibia had also been broken, but that healed. So I've got a knee per se, but none of it works really. I mean, when I'm not wearing my brace, you know, that it just kind of flops. I cannot control it. It flops about like that, but I can't lift it. It just stays there. If I lift my leg up, the whole thing goes up like that. It doesn't, you know, there's no real control over it. When I walk around without my brace, it's kind of like, you know, make my thigh move so that I lock the knee into position. And that's how I can walk without the brace, but I don't do that all the time.
So when you got out of the hospital in December, how did you get back into life?
Well, I had decided to go to seminary, and my minister took me up to Bangor Theological Seminary in Bangor, Maine, to check it out, and I applied up there and was accepted. You know, in the interim, I didn't go. You know, that was, well, actually, it was I got out in December, so that was 70. Then it's sort of 70 and 71, and most of the time, a lot of what I did was I spent a lot of time with Pat Kiley's family after I got out of the hospital. To go over, even when I wasn't in the hospital. I mean, even when I wasn't out of the hospital, when I would come home and be in a wheelchair, I would go over to her house. I had met the Kileys, well, John her father, he and I had been in the volunteer firemen together, and that's how I knew the whole family. So I'd go over there and play cards and games and just kind of enjoy being around people that weren't my family. And that was the...
So how did you deal with the trauma of
I ignored it for the most part. I mean, I was busy dealing with my leg most of the time, of how to do things, and I had a big clunky metal and leather brace, and I would be doing things, and I would stand on the leg with the brace, and then my knee would get locked, and then it was hell to pay to get it unlocked, because I would, what it really took was, it'd be locked straight, and in order to get it unlocked, I would just have to suddenly lift my thigh up, and you'd hear this click and a little shot of pain. But most of the time I was dealing with my leg, and then in September of '71 got to seminary, and things were pretty crazy because the war was still on, so there were people in seminary who were real anti-war folks, and it was, I would go to some of the anti-war things and listen to them, and it was like, boy, you guys are naive. I mean, and then I was really not exactly a gung-ho soldier. I mean, I really would have preferred not to have gone, but I went, ended up going anyway. And got married in 1973, and did talk some about Vietnam. But I was having nightmares and night sweats and all sorts of things that I sort of put out of my mind a lot of the time. And then was having trouble, struggling in school, struggling with the marriage and the relationship, and dropped out of school in '75, went back to Connecticut, started at the University of New Haven, was still struggling, doing a little bit better, and then my wife and I ended up getting divorced, and then basically I was doing a lot of self-medication with beer and wine and scotch, and staying up. I would not go to bed until maybe 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. I'd be up all day. I volunteered to work with the Program Fellowship at the church, which was the senior high youth group, which I did, which I enjoyed. And that was pretty much my only, what I was doing.
So you were afraid to sleep at night, or you just?
Yeah, I think I was afraid to sleep at night, and
this is about 5 years.
This is 5 years after. I mean, even earlier in '73, probably earlier. Well, one of the things that had happened was that when I was in the hospital, I would have to hear the explosion of the hand grenade in my head before I could fall asleep. And then when I was first at seminary, I would, if I talked about Vietnam during the day, then that night I would have to hear the explosion before I could fall asleep. And then that lessened over time. I didn't have that happening, but then other symptoms showed up, in the tendency to just kind of, be up all night, watching TV and eating and drinking and smoking cigarettes, and things weren't working all that well in a lot of ways.
So when did you figure that you needed to correct that, or that you needed to address it?
Well, I tried to address it in 1975. After the divorce became final, the assistant minister at church took me over to the VA in West Haven, and got me some counseling. I was really depressed, and really depressed, pretty bad shape. Luckily, I didn't have to work because I had my disability compensation. And I was seeing a therapist there for a little while, and he asked me if I'd ever been depressed before I went to Vietnam. And I said, yeah, I'd had depressive periods. And he said, well, then you're not service-connected. So they had put a big label on my file that I was not service-connected for post-traumatic stress disorder, because I'd had some depressive periods before. And that was the early part. It took a long time for the military and the VA to, even now with Iraq.
Wasn't the post-traumatic stress disorder, that was before, that was an unknown thing?
Well,
wasn't it?
I think they knew it.
But they didn't have the name for it, or?
Oh, they had the name they had for it used to be battle fatigue. That was the old name, was battle fatigue. Well, and that one of the reasons for the 12-month tour in Vietnam was to prevent battle fatigue. Well, what they didn't figure out, or they figured out finally afterwards, was that you got battle fatigue or post-traumatic stress disorder. It didn't matter, and the reason it didn't show up until later was because you could kind of hang on for 12 months. You could kind of, I've only got, I was almost a short timer. I had like 105 days left, and I had already started my short timer calendar. So I had a calendar with the 105 days on it, and I had started to cross. I think I had 103 when I was wounded. I had started to cross off the days. So you kind of hung on until, and then it wasn't until after you got back that you found out that all hell was breaking.
Were you able to get that designation to go away?
Yes, eventually. But it was really, given who I am, hard for me to tell somebody what was going on and what the symptoms were, because a lot of times I wasn't even aware of them. It wasn't until I was I dropped out of UNH again in 1977. No, earlier, 77 or 78. 78, I took a trip around the country that I had promised myself. I had bought a Ford van and fixed it up with a bed and everything so I could travel around the country. And that's what I did from 78 to 79, was travel around the country. And then after I got back from that trip in 1979, I went back to the University of New Haven and got into counseling there. And then around about 1980 or 81, my therapist at UNH said, there's a veterans center you could go to in New Haven. Oh, so one day I took myself down to Whaley Avenue and went in and saw the counselor there, and the first thing I talked about with him was that up close and personal thing, and then from there I went to join a meeting of other veterans at the vet center, and was going there every week to sit and talk about Vietnam and stuff. And it was there that I finally picked up on a lot of the things that I was doing that I wasn't. I mean, I was certainly aware of that I was drinking a lot and smoking a lot. And in 1977, I had quit smoking. I managed to do that. I don't know how. But I was still drinking heavily and staying up late at night, and still having the night sweats. Wake up soaking wet. The bed was soaking wet with sweat. I'm assuming I had some really hellish nightmares. And other things I did that I found out about in the Vietnam Veterans Group was that when I went to a restaurant, I would always find a seat that faced the door, no matter how uncomfortable I was physically, whether I could put my leg up and be relaxed or whatever. I would have to have my back sometimes almost try and find a seat at the back of the restaurant so I could watch the door. And various people, especially women I dated, commented that I wasn't looking at them. I was always scanning the room, looking for whatever.
So you're talking that you really didn't start to heal till almost a decade later.
I don't think I'm healed yet.
Well, and why do
Really?
you say that?
Well, because when Iraq started, the latest Iraq started, it was like, okay, here we go again, and then it started to bring things up. I mean, I'm a whole heck of a lot better than I used to be, but with Iraq and
So
some of
it's a
the
constant struggle.
and after you hear that the guys that were at Walter Reed weren't being treated well, And the guys that, the one guy who obviously had post-traumatic stress disorder out in Colorado was being dumped on by his company commanders and everybody else. I mean, it was like, that, to me, it was like going to the VA. When I first went to the VA, it was, what's your problem? it isn't Vietnam. None of this is because of Vietnam. You know, but I didn't know how to tell them, you would jump at I didn't realize sometimes that I would jump at noises. Certain noises would always get to me. I mean, when I'm watching a war movie or watching Vietnam war movies, and somebody's supposedly firing an M16, and it's like, it's not an M16. It was some other, they just had a machine gun firing. It wasn't the actual, You could always tell when it was a genuine article,
When did you finally hear the term post-traumatic stress disorder and realize that that was what you've been dealing with?
I think it was while I was going to the veterans group.
So that's
Or probably actually it was probably with my therapist at UNH. And I picked up, during that time period, I was reading all sorts of novels and books about Vietnam, and then picked up a book on post-traumatic that a couple of psychologists had written about why some people got it and why some people didn't, and which was like, really made a lot of sense to me. And it's still there. It's nowhere near what it was.
Did they change your designation in the military to post-traumatic?
Yeah, I have part of my disability is for post-traumatic. But the hard part about that one was when I went to be interviewed for that, they had an Oriental psychiatrist doing the interview, and the walls just closed down. And it was like, I should say Asian, but I mean, it was Chinese or Korean or whatever, but it was still an Asian face that was questioning me, and my response to a lot of that is to shut down and just. And so, well, do you jump when things, does this happen, does that happen? And, they're really pretty monosyllabic about it, and I never, didn't say anything about the nightmares and the night sweats and the.
When did they change it? Now, how many years after you've been out of Vietnam did you finally get the designation?
Oh, probably around 80 or 81, 82, someplace in there. I think it was before I went to the Vietnam Vets Group, because when I went there, then it started to become clear, all of the things that.
When you were talking to people who were experiencing.
Talking to people who were having the same experiences, and somebody who mentioned the restaurant thing. Oh, I do that, and then it was like realizing, oh, well, there were other times earlier on when I would go to the grocery store and I would have a panic attack. I would just be sweating from head to toe. And it was like, it was closed. It was closed in, and once I started dealing with it as this is part of the likelihood of an NVA or a VC jumping out from behind the end of the aisle in the grocery store was pretty low, And when I would go to the mall, and there would be a potted plant over in the corner, and it was like. And then it was, no, this is in a mall, and the likelihood of
continually trying to keep rational thought.
Trying to be rational about it, but walking or being in a line at like at a merry-go-round or in a bank or something where people are right here. I mean, in Vietnam, you learn to keep your interval between. At least 15 feet between the person in front of you and the person behind you, so that the more you grouped up, the more chances are you were going to be shot at in that group. If you were spread apart, the less chance. So when you're in a line someplace at a carnival or a bank, when the people are only this far away from each other, I would be. I would do it, but it would be.
Now, do you still feel that, or?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes.
It still comes back.
Sometimes it comes back, and if what was it? One of the weirdest ones was it wasn't until like 1985 that I smelled wet earth again. Because when I was wounded, I was down on the ground and was bombarded with the wet earth. And I mean, I'm sure that physically I smelled it, in all of those years. But it wasn't until like 84, 85 that I actually, after a rainstorm, went back to my apartment and went, oh, wet earth. And I was like, I don't think I've smelled that in 15 years. To be actually conscious of it.
Well, I guess we'll call this a wrap.
Okay.
And I thank you so much. Let's see if we got audio.
Okay. Yeah, ended up calling it, a group of us that were in the particular rap group in New Haven. Bob Janicki and Dave DuBose, Joe Mariani, me, Nancy, I don't remember, she wasn't part of our group, she was an Army nurse, and Julie Christie, who was a donut dolly in Vietnam. The six of us all got together at Bob Janicki's request and became a group to tell our stories and tell it to people, basically. And so we each took our own theme. Mine was still wounded in Vietnam, where I would talk about my physical wounding, and then I would also talk about the post-traumatic stress disorder, always finishing up that I was still wounded in Vietnam, that it isn't over yet. And we did programs, we were just like a panel. We would each do our own speech. We went to Yale, we went to Southern Connecticut, we did it at Southern New England Telephone. I think we went up to Hartford. We went to Northfield Academy up in Massachusetts because there was a connection there with our Master of Ceremonies. He was part of the group and helped us get everything organized. We also did a Talking Heads video where he came and interviewed us most of us at home, and we talked about our experiences and questions, were asked about.
And when was this?
This was, it must have been 85, 86, because I had started working at SNET in 84, and Bob Janicki had been the person who helped me get my job at SNET. So it was after that, when I was already at SNET, that we came together.
The healing process.
That helped. Yeah, that helped a lot. And it was. It's interesting. I haven't watched the video in a long time, but now that Eileen sent me the DVD of it instead of the, I have VCR tapes of it, but now I have a DVD of it too. So it's kind of like, well, time to sit down and watch this all again. Sometimes it's talking about having the panic attacks at the grocery store and things like that. That's something I talked about on the video. It's like, oh, it sounds so silly now, but it was so very real that, and occasionally now I'll have I don't know why. It's just sometimes I'll be in a store and suddenly it comes back, whether I'm thinking about Vietnam at that point or whatever. It's just, whoops. But the group, that was very interesting with
You were able
the
to
six of us.
show people.
Able to show people all the different aspects of it. Bob was a Marine. I was in the infantry. Joe was a long-range reconnaissance patrol person. Nancy was an Army nurse who took care of us. I never knew her, of course, in Vietnam, but she told her story. And Jean Christie, who was a donut dolly, she actually was one of the leaders of the donut dollies, telling her story about what it was like for her as a 19-year-old, I think, to go to Vietnam as a civilian and wander around in this war zone.
Right. Interesting.
You know, and Dave DuBose, in his experience being African American, which was a little bit different from the rest of us. The rest of us are white, and it was, you know, so it was a conglomeration of all of all these different stories of all the different kinds of things that happened to us. It was like watching the Vietnam movies. Well, that was one thing that I've been was thinking about was the Green Berets, the movie Green Berets, which is like, you know, not really a good Vietnam movie. But I could never watch it until sometime in 1976 or 77, I got myself good and drunk one night, and because I knew the Green Berets was going to be on TV, and I watched it, and I managed to get through it. But it was enough of Vietnam, with the people in their black pajamas and as we call them black pajamas. I don't remember what they call them, and their conical straw hats that the farmers wore. It was enough, and they were really using the real weapons, the real noises, the real sounds. So even though it wasn't a very good movie as far as Vietnam was concerned, it was still enough to set somebody off with post-traumatic, to set you off.
Right.
You know, you just. And once I watched that, after I always said, well, you got drunk and watched it, and then it became a little bit easier to deal with things. But it was. So all of these things come together, and a lot of it came together in Vietnam, a chance to understand, just to give people an idea of, you know, war is not a whole heck of a lot of fun.
No. Well, I thank you so much for doing this.
You're welcome.
Thanks you.